Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with What Are You Listening to Lately? And one of the things I've been listening to lately, just for the joy of it, I so seldom have time to have the joy of it. No, actually, I do. I really do. Are these Beethoven's String Trios Opus 9 with the trio Zimmermann, featuring Frank Peter Zimmermann, Antoine Temestit, viola, and Christian Poltera, cello. What a great group they are. This is on BIS. These are marvelous works. There are three of them in the Opus 9 selection. Normally, composers wrote 6 works in a group, 6 or 12, but sometimes 3, and this is a 3B. And Beethoven wrote these in 1797-98. They're often described as a preparation for his string quartets, Opus 18. I actually think they're better, personally. That's just me, I suppose, but I really do. It's very interesting considering how Beethoven approached his career. You know, Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven, well, Beethoven didn't know Mozart, but Haydn and Mozart knew each other. And one of the really cool things about Haydn and Mozart is how they kind of avoided each other's specialties, except for extraordinary works. For example, Haydn was a string quartet guy. Mozart wrote beautiful string quartets, but his best were the ones he dedicated to Haydn. He specifically brought Haydn into the picture. Mozart was the ultimate concerto guy in the classical period. Haydn was not. He generally avoided concertos. Haydn wrote tons of operas, but when someone said to him, well, you really ought to write an opera for something, and Haydn always wished he'd written a great opera and could have been a popular opera composer and wasn't stuck writing, instrumental music, which was considered by everybody to be less significant than vocal music. And he said, no, ask Mozart. I wouldn't dare try to compete with Mozart in the field of opera, but he kept writing string quartets and he kept writing symphonies. He knew what he was really good at. Now, Haydn was one of Beethoven's teachers, as we all know. And Beethoven, perhaps taking a look at the output of Haydn and Mozart, was a little bit cautious about what he was planning on doing. And so his first, aside from piano sonatas, which were a new thing, you have to remember, Mozart's piano sonatas weren't published, and they were written for mostly his pupils. They're not nearly as interesting as his music for piano and orchestra. Haydn's piano sonatas were actually much more interesting in many respects than Mozart's, or some of them are anyway. And the late ones include the first true concert sonatas to be played by a virtuoso in a concert setting. But there are only a couple of them. Really, there's only one, actually, his last one, number 62 in E flat. Before that, there are also house music to be played amongst connoisseurs, however good they were. And Haydn wrote for some very fine, principally female pianists. That's where that stuff came from. So Beethoven surveyed the universe and said, okay, he was up and coming, and he was extremely paranoid and very difficult in terms of his personality. We all know that. What can I do that they haven't done yet? Now, Haydn wrote a ton of string trios, but Beethoven wouldn't have known them. And they're all early, and they're all for like 2 violins and bass. They're not the classical string trio of violin, viola, and cello. Mozart is famous for writing possibly the greatest string trio of all time, his Divertimento in E flat, that extraordinary 6-movement monster piece for string trio that's like 50 minutes long. It's absolutely glorious, but Beethoven might not have known that, and that was a one-off thing. I mean, no one had systematically exploited string trios as a medium. So Beethoven, who was not about to go into symphonies and not about to go into quartets, he was 27 around that time, and in 1797, somewhere around there, right? 98. He was somewhere in there. Yeah, 1770. So yeah, he was 27. He wrote string trios because the field was open. And as is always the case when a composer writes in an open field, a field which is open, they can relax a little. And that relaxation often helps in writing music that's just really, really terrific, because they're not overthinking, they're not overworking it. The same thing happened with Brahms. Listen to his sextets or his string quintets compared to his string quartets. where in the sextets particularly, he's just gushing with melodies and having a fabulous time. And so do we, because he can relax. Even Mozart, his string quintets, which Haydn didn't write any of, are his greatest chamber works. However marvelous his quartets are, however glorious the quartets dedicated to Haydn are, the Mozart quintets, now there's something. And, Haydn and Mozart premiered them at home in a domestic setting with Haydn and Mozart playing the viola parts. God, I wish I could have been there when they first did those things, because they're extraordinary, and they're extraordinary because the composer never seems to be straining. Beethoven's Opus 18 quartets I find to be rather difficult to listen to because I think they're overwritten, as Brahms's quartets are. They are trying so hard to show how good they are at counterpoint and close thematic workmanship and being as good as Haydn and all that stuff. And the result is that they're denser and often longer and sort of overwrought. You don't ever get a sense of that in the string trios. And just because they're string trios, that doesn't mean they're small works. They're not. These are 4-movement works. They're grand in scale. The 3 of them take up 73 minutes and 50 seconds on this very lovely BIS recording. They take up quite a bit of time, and they're splendid, and they're forward-looking, and they're just Beethoven showing what he could do in a medium where he did not fear the competition. And for that reason, I think they're fascinating and delightful, and some of Beethoven's best early works. Beethoven thought they were the best things he'd done up to that point. Whether he thought they were the best things he did after that point, of course, composers tend to be in love with their latest efforts. But Beethoven was actually pretty good, knowing when he'd done something really fine. And he thought these were, and he was right. And I'm not sure the Opus 18 quartets are better. I'm really not. They're certainly more complex. They're certainly more ambitious. But that doesn't make them better. These are very, very serious, very beautiful, very emotionally affecting, just gorgeous works. Absolutely beautiful. And the string trio medium is a lovely one to listen to. Just 3 strings, but you can still create textures and harmonies of such fullness and richness and density, but you can't really overwrite with a string trio because you're stuck with 3 people. And so you have to always keep that in mind. Beethoven does. And these are wonderful, wonderful works. So this is what I've been listening to lately. And these are just some of my thoughts about them. If you don't know the Opus 9 string trios, by Beethoven, you owe yourself the opportunity to give them a listen. You will be very glad that you did. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks so much for joining me. Take care.